Odyssey, Chapter 22. Kamal peered down at the sea. The wooded hillside overlooked the coastal town of Bourbon on the continent's edge. The town sat at the end of a major trade route, the last habitation before the open ocean. A long peninsula jogged out of the mainland, creating a protected bay. Like a single finger of hills, it beckoned to ships searching for port. Waterfowl and a few seals sunning themselves populated the last spit of land. The barbarian walked on the hilltop along an overgrown trail, soaring above the main road. The joint caravans of the Cabal and the Mer Empire broke apart many miles behind him. The animals went south, and a few of the wagons continued on to Bourbon. Kamal had parted ways with Emerald some days before, leaving the barbarian alone to walk into the town. A few small ships lay anchored in the bay, with only one pier stretching out into the water for the transfer of freight from small vessels. Out on the water, a single lighter accepted a net of cargo from a larger ship. Oars started to row the boat back to the docks and the warehouse. Well back from town, nearly in the surrounding hills, sat a small arena, nearly oval in shape. It was constructed out of wood, the large logs and rough-cut timbers whitewashed in the sun. It pressed against an outcropping of rock, the interior looking muddy from a distance. Sand was piled out inside the fighting ring. The color told the barbarian it was hauled up from the shore. The arena stood deserted now, but the mountain mage knew it would be crowded during market days and festivals. The best source of information regarding the ambassador and his stolen prize would undoubtedly be the bars around the docks and the arena. He was no seaman, and he resolved to try the inns close to the fighting ring, knowing he could mix with the jacks. The town looked still now, but when the fishermen returned to port, the docks would teem. He wondered when the bouts would start in the arena, so he could interact with familiar types of people. He considered his own appearance as he thought about poking around for information regarding the troubles in the east. The Order would distribute descriptions, and the ambassador might have left word of him as well. He wore a grey cloak now, the Ellen garment gradually shrinking to fit him as he plied needle and dagger. The metal-hued races were uncommon, but by no means unknown on the continent. Only two things were uniquely his own, his name and his sword. He drew the weapon, holding it in his open palms as he considered it. Long as he was tall, the massive blade showed little signs of wear. Rings rattled softly on the blade as he rotated it. Ever since procuring it during his quests as a young man, he had carried it. The steel and fire evoked from the mystical metal had cut many an enemy low. But in the mountains, the sword had gained its own reputation, as fulsome as Kamal's, and was more unique in appearance. Regretfully, he decided that the weapon must rest here, above the town, to await his return. He walked to a tree, its roots wrapping around a boulder as if holding it to the ground. He looked at his sword and called power. It flowed into the steel, the energy streaming fluidly throughout the weapon. He set the nearly flat point against the rocks, the shallow edge still cutting the stone. His muscles ached as he pushed. Gradually the metal burrowed its way through the rock. Kamal strained until the hilt began to disappear. He exhausted more of his strength as he picked up a stone and set it against the hilt. The weapon's advance continued as his hands held rock rather than the familiar leather-wrapped hilt. Stone touched stone, and he closed the final inches. The smell of hot metal ceased as his granite pad disappeared into the rocky anvil. Kamal walked to his gear, looking at the pack and several bags. He realized he had grown too dependent on steeds. He separated out the essential from the merely convenient and laid out tarps to encase the saddle and gear too heavy to carry into town. He opened a bag he intended to cache by the boulder holding his sword. Arms picked up during his travels rattled as he searched. Near the bottom, he withdrew a weapon found just days before. Roving bands of Order knights swept the roads looking for signs of Kamal and the animals whose attacks had been so disruptive. The soldiers also inspected wagons for forbidden objects. News of the disastrous spell in the citadel drove the knights to new heights in destroying past evils. The mercenaries driving caravans of excavated treasures lacked the will to fight the Order. During his trek here, the barbarian had come across a few of their abandoned wagons. He drew forth a massive hammer. The head was black iron. Magic reinforced the metal and the haft. The long handle was white ivory, perhaps from some fallen mammoth or some other such beast. The dense grip and the oversized head made it a weapon for a giant rather than something the size of a man. His muscles bunched as he hefted it. He remembered Emerald's look of momentary outrage when he loaded the hammer. He had found it lying in the open near another cache of weapons. Knowing it abandoned, he had still dropped most of his money in the resting place. Whoever came looking for it would be disappointed but surprised at the consideration of the person who rescued it from destruction by the Order. Perhaps the Cabal or a corrupt bird warrior had his money even now, but it would have felt wrong to take it without any attempt at compensation. He stuffed his sword scabbard in his bags and hid them and the saddle. He held the hammer in his hands and felt the weight. Only his constant practice with his own massive sword allowed him to swing it with assurance. He took one last look and started through the trees to the road. It took some time to reach the highway, even with the barbarian's rapid pace and sure feet. It drew towards evening as Kamal came into the town. The streets led down to the docks, but he took a switchback trail to the arena. On the bay, the last of the fishing vessels were coming in, the catch being transferred to the packing houses. Lights came up around the arena as street musicians began to play. Reeds and strings duelled in melody, as fighters soon would inside. The local inn competed with men selling food on the street, and clusters of fishermen up from the docks drifted towards the bars. Kamal shouldered patrons aside as he came into the inn. "What might I do for you?" a barman called, drawing drinks for the house. The light was dim and the room close and crowded. The smell of the food cooking in the kitchen and the proprietor's face both seemed pleasant enough. "I need a room and meals for the next several days," Kamal said, resting his hammer on the bar. The fighting weapon drew only a few glances. Perhaps they were used to jacks from the arena. The coins he threw down attracted substantially more attention. The barbarian recalled how much he spent at the inns at the tourney in Cabal City. From the respectful glances, the cost of room and board in Bourbon was substantially less. "We can accommodate you, sir," the bartender cried, grabbing up a set of keys. He came around the bar, ignoring the empty tankards waved in his direction. The proprietor's bald head sweated from exertion and the heat in the crowded room. He picked up the barbarian's saddlebags and tried to pick up the hammer as well. The unexpected weight left him standing still for a moment, before Kamal lifted the heavy weapon onto his shoulder. "I want a room with a view of the harbor," the mountain mage said as he followed the owner up the stairs. The steps were narrow, and the light peeked over the solid banister. A single lamp lit the hall. The keys rattled briefly as the innkeeper unlocked the door. The room was small, and the window sealed off. Kamal's guide dropped the bags and threw the shutters open, letting a salty breeze carry over the sash to the barbarian. "Best view in the house," the owner said. The makings for a fire were laid in a fireplace, and the linens looked clean. "There are chops and a roast for dinner tonight and rabbits tomorrow. We always prepare food for the arena crowd. After that, the kitchen shuts down for a week, unless a guest makes private arrangements. I'll send a girl with a coal to start a blaze and bring you whatever you want from the kitchen." Kamal waved, and a glowing ember seemed to float through the air and land on the prepared wood. The logs burst into flame, instantly pouring out heat with no showers of sparks. "I will take my own meals tonight," the barbarian said, laying the hammer on the bed, which sagged. "I prefer my privacy and will have no trouble tending my own fires. If you would give me the key to this room and any spares." The owner hesitated as the mountain mage approached. He laid the brass in the jack's hands and bowed his way out, eyes flickering from the fire to the weapon on the bed. Kamal closed the door and went to the window. The townfolk flowed up from the sea's edge towards the entertainment offered behind him at the arena.
A few heavy wagons were left on the pier, a luckless sentry standing guard as his friends climbed the hill. The wagons had the look of long-haul freight, and the barbarian resolved to make inquiries about them tomorrow.
The crowds in the street and bars drained away as he left the inn. The arena was small, and Kamal was immediately conducted to a box seat with a small tray of refreshments as he entered. Someone from the inn had obviously informed the arena operators of his presence. This was not the reception the barbarian, now unknown outlaw, expected. A porter waited to the side, ready to speak as the entertainment commenced. First was a light and easy comedy of the blood sports. Two groups of men, fishermen from the gate, came into the arena. Kamal looked for an emblem of the fight, and the porter swept forward.
Just two crews who had a disagreement over boundaries, sir, the servitor explained. The winner of the bout fixes the new fishing boundary of the disputed area.
Kamal turned to see if anyone else received such specialized service, but the layout of the boxes prevented him from observing others. A piercing whistle sounded, and the crews rushed each other. Men were clad in padded jerkins, and their clubs were wrapped in cloth. They fell to like madmen, flailing at heads and joints. The fishers only disengaged when armed guards dragged away the wounded. Within minutes, only one staggering figure remained, though most of the others appeared to be recovering off on the sidelines. The winner left with his arms held high, though attendants came out to guide him to the exit. The next act was simple acrobats and tumblers, their antics entertaining the crowd as the next bill readied themselves.
Here we are too short of fighters and beasts to have more than a few matches during any night,
the servant said nervously as he watched the barbarian eat.
Kamal cast only occasional glances towards the exhibition.
Finally, the signal was given, and the acrobats somersaulted free, leaving the floor clear. The servant left as two fighters emerged, each wearing colors of arena staff. One was tall and scarred, wearing a steel mask and leather armor. A short flail with two spiked heads swung slowly at his side. The other opponent leaned on a staff of black wood, a brazier producing smoke in different colors that swept over him. He was short and spindly, dressed only in the tattered clothes that ruffled slightly as a gust of wind swept the arena. The servant glanced in from his rounds of the other boxes. "Does your staff fight, or is it just the fishermen?" Kamal asked as hoots began to rise up from the audience.
"We are very small compared to the inland arenas, my lord,"
the servitor said, projecting obsequiousness in the face of perceived disappointment.
"The large gladiatorial companies avoid us, the crowds being too small and the gambling syndicates unable to handle serious betting. We must rely on house fighters for the majority of the bouts."
The signal to begin the bout rang, and the waiting dementia caster dug his staff into the soil. The shaft cast a long shadow, though no bright light existed to throw such a pole. From the depths of shadow came laughter. Then, several twisted monsters exited the darkness. Their flesh appeared parched, their hands showing bone as they shuffled about in a gruesome dance. The masked fighter swung his flail as the tall mage called for more creatures from his mind and raised the bones of the dead from the ground. The race of the corpses was impossible to determine because the flesh was in such a poor condition. The dementia caster soared his staff back and forth, the shadow racing over the ground. The black wave coated the flesh of the risen, drawing the moisture out. Their flesh shriveled as tendons and muscle grew too tenuous to keep the bodies together. The field cleared as laughing corpses fell on each other and dragged food back to the darkness from which they sprang. Some of the horrific creatures called forth from the dementia caster's mind ignored everything and staggered around the arena. Cries sounded from the gate guards as the dead beat on the barriers keeping them inside. Others turned on the masked fighter who began to fall back. The flail smashed bones, but the twisted dead continued snapping at his heels, their bodies coiling and rebuilding into even more twisted fragments of the short mage's imagination. A few of the creatures even turned on their creator, advancing on the staff. The shadow it cast began to sweep back and forth, the pole forming a cone in front of the mage. The rebelling monsters fell as their limbs spilled to the ground, their frames melting like frost on a skillet.
The masked Jack fought harder as more of the laughing closed on him. Acknowledging defeat, the fighter knelt in submission, his mask dipping to the ground. The dementia caster withdrew his staff from the ground and knocked the brazier over. The summoned vanished like nightmares at dawn as the short victor bowed to the applause of the crowd.
The crowd roared in the stands above as the workers tried to reassemble the dead. The arena operator and 2 assistants laid out the bodies of the slain. Some had been dead a very long time, and the smells smashed against the barbarian. Kamal had left his private box before the next bout to talk to the owners about fighting in their establishment. He found the master hard at work preparing for the next night.
Make sure that you find as many body parts as you can, the promoter told the groundskeeper.
The arena owner's pale skin contrasted with the dirt and leather smock he wore. Splotches of blood and caustic burns covered his apron and sections of revealed skin.
There are rumors sweeping the docks, and sailors are asking for burial at sea again instead of in port.
He shooed the servant away and regarded the Jack.
So, you wish to join our little family?
The pit boss asked, searching through a pile of limbs for an arm to complete a dead dwarf, preservative fluid dripping from the torn flesh. Kamal shook his head. I wish to compete in the arena against your fighters, he corrected. He looked at the dead being reconstructed for later battles. Your family appears quite big enough, he said with distaste. The promoter ignored the tone.
You would be surprised how difficult it is to keep a large enough supply for Enoch and Apel, our necromancers,
surrendering in his quest and throwing a random arm in the dwarf's case.
We'll have to bury these tonight in the arena. Apel's zombies always cart off the dead, despite how short we are. We used to get sailors, but my brother forgot to alter one's looks. Now it's almost impossible to get them after they die.
He moved on to the next casket, whose contents the barbarian avoided looking at.
The crowds are growing very tired of the same old faces week after week.
I am offering something new, Kamal said, stepping around to peer in the mild eyes. Someone whom your clients have not seen before. The proprietor waved to his assistants and walked to the back with the barbarian following.
You understand that we rarely fight to the death here, the official said,
hanging his splattered apron onto a hook before stepping into an office.
Also, the deal is contingent on my brother's agreement when it comes to meeting with betmongers.
I'll not put on a show, Kamal said, his eyes growing hard. When I fight, it will be for real. However, I need not kill your fighters. Understand that they can surrender when they are overwhelmed. The owner waved the demand away.
A Jack in a small arena has no use for a champion's heirs, he said, drawing forth a piece of paper. Now I will need your name for the criers circulating tonight if you plan to fight tomorrow.
The barbarian paused before answering. It would be easiest to give a false name, but an outright lie stuck in his throat. Call me the Hammer, he said, sparking the proprietor's interest. Only by defeating me will someone learn my true name. The fat man nodded, seeing the possibilities.
You will need to clean your armor, and we must design a suitable emblem,
the owner continued as he led the barbarian away. A host of functionaries followed, all trying to mold Kamal to their own idea of what a fighter should be. He was brusque in refusing their offers of advice on how to fight and the proper attire to wear. He did allow the armorer to work on his protective gear, which had suffered during his travels. It seemed only minutes and he was standing in the center of the arena, the noise of the crowd merging into an unintelligible muttering. The grey cloak was thrown back, his iron shirt dark against his brass skin. Kamal swung his hammer, stretching out the kinks in his muscles. His first opponent was Appel, a short dementia caster. Knowing the reputation of such mages, Kamal wondered if the house fighter would follow the rules. The barbarian believed that the short summoner would soon be surrendering, but he must be prepared for a battle to the death.
The crowd began to chant as Appel strode into the arena and lowered his equipment to the ground. The dementia caster stood on the sand, a burning brazier at his side. Appel threw power onto the glowing coals and a heavy cloud of smoke rose, making his features waver and change. The dark mage dug his staff into the ground and a thin shadow stretched out from the shaft, advancing towards the light behind Kamal's head, rather than away. The familiar shuffling figures of the mirthful dead began to appear, cackling perhaps at the joke of life itself. Kamal wondered how predictable his opponent would be. The barbarian called forth his own magic, a field of possibility forming over the sand. He would experiment, use the arena to teach himself new methods of attack and defense. Several cougars surged out of nothingness onto the arena floor, their roars stilling the cries of the crowd. The zombies came on, their laughter continuing even as many were pulled down and savaged by the great cats. If any of the dead were reconstructed corpses, the mountain mage did not envy the mortician's tasks in repairing the bodies. The dementia caster seemed oblivious to the failure of his forces, ignoring the feasting cats. Appel sent more undead onto the arena floor. A tattered wave threatening to overwhelm Kamal's spell by choking his beasts under the wave of cold flesh. The barbarian concentrated again, the cloud of his summoning stretching wider as he played a little to the crowd. A flock of mountain sheep stormed onto the sand. They milled for a moment, their waist-high bodies losing themselves in a blur as the fierce rams fought for possession. Kamal nudged them into action with a mental command, and the beasts lowered their tightly curled horns and stormed forward. The rams struck hard, shattering bone and bringing the dead down. Clawed hands and fangs struck at Kamal's creatures but could not penetrate the dense wool that defeated the cold wind of the mountains and the hot breath of timber wolves. Appel lifted his staff into the air, his face now agitated as his forces fell to mere sheep. In frustration he speared the oak into the sand. Power poured into the soil. Like cobras rising to strike, dark spears rose from the ground. The shadowy weapons bobbed and weaved before falling on the animals that ground up the dead. The wool that resisted the strength of the zombies sundered as the beasts were transfixed. The few remaining cougars expired in yowling pain. The rams fell as mutton, the undead rising up as Appel poured new strength into their shattered bones. The bodies tottered towards the barbarian more twisted and cackling than before, but the upright spears of night were straight as they drifted towards the mountain mage. Kamal stepped forward, his brow wrinkling as he once again contested with the universe. Now hulking figures came onto the arena sands, their roars of displeasure shaking the crowd until the mighty monsters choked off their cries with dead flesh. Their white fur grew stained with blood and gore as they tore apart those coming too close to their master. The Yetis discarded limbs as they worked their way back to the dementia caster. The enemy mage's black spears dived to spill life to the ground, but despite the humanoid's bulk, they dodged the dark weapons with ease. Their agility honed by the mountain cliffs their kind regularly traveled. They wrung their way up the line of zombies, and Kamal raised his hammer, waiting for the next attack. The crowd cried out as the Yetis approached their enemy, their bloody hands reaching for the weedy mage. The dementia caster dropped, his body heaved. Kamal paused, holding his minions in case his opponent was surrendering, uncertain with all the particulars of this arena. A wave of corrupting flesh seemed to spew from the underworld. The zombies Appel called forth vanished, disappearing or devoured by his newest creation. The mass lunged for the approaching Yetis, lifting itself into the air and spreading out in a great sheet of corruption. The mountain apes disappeared under the dark spell as the mound fell with a thunderous retort. The impact ruptured coffins buried in the dirt. Bodies lolled to the ground and were swallowed by the spreading wave. The crowd called for Kamal's defeat, cheering on their favorite. The barbarian was done with calling monster and readied his hammer. The iron head fell as the first tendrils reached him. The mole struck the ground, a shattering concussion setting the sand rolling, flinging back the formless flesh. The jack took a step forward as his hammer thundered again. The magic concussion splattered the corruption back, the waves of power shaking the stands. The strength of his attack diminished as Kamal controlled his power. He cleaved a path with reverberating blows, working his way across the arena until he stood before a Pell. The power assaulted the mage's bones and he leaned on his staff, too unsteady to remain upright without the support. The barbarian raised his hammer and paused to allow the dementia caster to forfeit. The necromancer bowed his head in defeat. Cheers sounded as Kamal nodded magnanimously, and offered his hand in a show of sportsmanship. The barbarian turned, and bowed to the proprietors in their box and the crowd in the stands. The fighters started for the exit and the alehouse, anxious to wash the stench of the dead from his frame. The serving girl scooped meat onto the barbarian's trencher, and the gravy started to sink into the bread. Kamal took a bite, and the juices tasted delicious as he washed the meal down with ale. The other customers regarded him warmly, despite his defeat of the local fighter. The novelty of a new opponent gave him popularity he had not received in Cabal City. The Hill Tavern was full. As a new patron came into view of the stranger, his deliberate air of mystery was another draw. So far, Kamal had given no name except that of his new weapon. The ivory and iron creation lay across the table as enthusiasts walked slowly by it, caressing it with their eyes. The dementia caster's defeat and the adulation of the crowd pleased the barbarian. His battle had been the climax of the night. It had been a short bill, with only the duel between an unknown and local champion bringing any crowd. The enthusiasm and respect was heady, but Kamal remembered this was only a single step in his quest for the orb. A group crowded closer to his table and he looked up. 3 young men, dressed in armor and carrying brand new weapons, coughed for his attention. None of their gear showed wear, and most appeared of indifferent quality. 2 of them were dark, their skin rough from exposure to the weather. They were fit, but were uncomfortable with their weapons. The middle boy was tall and thin, with muscle showing but lacking the calluses of his companions. He wore his clothes and elegant boots well enough. However, he seemed no more at ease with the sword at his hip than his companions. The barbarian wondered if they were working up the nerve to challenge him or pick a fight to show their own bravery. Many Jacks reveled in such fights, but not Kamal. "You have a question?" he growled, his irritation deepening his voice. They jumped back, then 2 pushed the center of their trio forward.
"If you please, sir," the blonde said hesitantly, his hands falling to his belt. "We wondered if you might be available for students seeking instruction?"
Kamal laughed shortly, the boys' faces reddening. His mirth was more at his own expense than the youngsters', but the adolescents were wound too tightly for any hint of humor. They started to withdraw, but the barbarian called them back. "Your pardon, sirs," Kamal apologized. "I expected a different question. Please join me." The 3 drew up stools and sat down. The serving wench brought more tankards at the barbarian's wave.
"I am Girder, son of Chandler,"
the blond boy said, giving a seated bow.
"These are my friends, Wazzle and Burden. Their father owns 2 fishing boats. We hope to learn magic from you," he added bluntly.
"Why me?" the mountain mage said. "Surely there are others willing to teach. Fighters from the arena, perhaps." He took a sip as he thought. To be a fighting master was a serious relationship in the mountains. He had spent years working with his mentor and could not see himself in such a role for now, but he remembered his own stumbling steps in search of magic. Perhaps he could help the boys.
"We want you to teach us, because there are few willing to teach. Apple and Enoch will both take students, but we feel uneasy with calling on the dead. Besides, you are the first in quite some time to beat either of them," Goethe said,
his friends nodding in agreement. "I don't know my own plans," Kamal said, playing for time. "I will offer my opinions on the available teachers. I have skill, but you need a master rather than a fighter. I leave soon. In any case, it depends on what I learn about the trade caravans." "My father is completely familiar with them," Goethe exclaimed.
flushing with pleasure now rather than rage.
Our father sometimes hauls cargo under the caravans to the freight ships waiting at the bay, one of the brothers chimed in. Though there isn't much call for his services anymore.
Yes, said Goethe with a frown, reclaiming the conversation.
The number of wagons hauling cargo to the coast plummeted when the order cable were active. They stopped caravans across the continent, searching for stolen artifacts.
They say that an agent for the Cabal stole a magic sword belonging to the head of the Order. She had her throat cut in her sleep.
One of the dark-haired boys the barbarian thought it Wazzle spoke with a certain amount of relish.
I heard the ambassador from the Emperor's court and his fighting frog stole it during an animal attack on the captain,
his brother Burton said, determined to speak at least once.
They even say a metal-skinned barbarian killed the captain and a lieutenant and stole away a great treasure,
Koda confessed, glancing towards Kamal. His friends looked nervously at the mountain fighter, who smiled back. I never had the pleasure of meeting the captain. The three youths laughed uproariously as if Kamal told a great jest. I am, however, interested in occurrences inland. Perhaps I will return that way. I also might travel by ship, so I would appreciate any news of the Empire. Please join me, and we will talk more. Kamal watched them wave for the waitress and wondered how many rumors and false trails battled with the truth. Perhaps he would stay in Bourbon a while, finding news sources from the Empire. One thing was certain: further travel was pointless without more information.